We are going to start today's program. We will begin our program with the recitation of Holy Quran. I invite Mr. Shah Ajmal Farooq Nadwi Saab, in charge Urdu Projects IAS, to recite some verses from Holy Quran. Mr. Ajmal Farooq Nadwi Saab.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم पढ़ो अपने रब के नाम से जिसने तुम्हें पैदा किया, जिसने इंसान को खून के एक लोथड़े से पैदा किया। पढ़ो अपने करीम रब के नाम से जिसने कलम के जरिए इल्म सिखाया, उसने इंसान को वो सब सिखाया जो वो नहीं जानता था। सदक़ल्लाहुल अज़ीम।
My greetings to all. Today is 11th November, the birth anniversary of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. This day is celebrated as the National Education Day because of certain reasons. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad was the first education minister and a great educationist and excellent visionary. He brought some reforms which are prevalent even today. He was education minister of independent India from 1947 to 1958. He advocated for free compulsory primary education for all children up to the age of 14. Between 1947 to 58, on his initiative, the budgetary allocation of education was raised 15-fold. He was instrumental in establishing Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi, and contributed to setting up of IITs also. He was also one of the brains behind the University Grants Commission, India's higher education regulator. He put emphasis on the teaching of modern sciences and also on the education of women. I welcome you all to this program. I welcome from the core of my heart to the learned speaker of today's today's program, Professor Rizwan Qaisar Saab. My mentor, Professor M.H. Qureshi, who is presiding over this function, Dr. Muhammad Manzoor Alam, Chairman IOS, and he is also a visionary, and Professor Zadem Khan Saab, Secretary General, Institute of Objective Studies, and all other participants online as well as offline. Dear friends, we are celebrating this program with the theme Education, a Way Forward. Institute of Objective Studies is celebrating this with this theme because Institute of Objective Studies is also committed for the overall upliftment, especially the educational upliftment of minorities, marginalized sections of the society, and downtrodden people. It is a think tank of the country and successfully completed 33 years of its existence with steady progress and widening the scope of its endeavors as a non-political and non-profitable organization. It has gained recognition in all relevant quarters at national and international plane for promoting research, conducting surveys on relevant themes, publishing books and journals in areas of national concern, and pressing challenges of civil society. Awarding scholarships to meritorious students and scholars, actively participating in social welfare, education, and managerial fields. It has also responded actively to national issues, particularly relating to problems and placement of minorities in general and Muslims in particular. It has tried its best to uphold the ideals of secularism, democracy, rule of law, and constitutionalism. Institute of Objective Studies has completed more than 410 research projects and has come out with about 425 publications focusing on various aspects of socio-economic and educational problems of Muslims and the society. The Institute of Objective Studies has so far organized 1,225 national as well as international conferences, seminars, symposia, workshops, and lectures on the themes of social relevance. The Institute has acquired marked credibility in achieving steady progress in bringing together a galaxy of academicians, policy makers, researchers, social workers, both at national as well as international level. And for this Institute of Objective Studies has received many awards. It has received many appreciations and certificates nationally as well as internationally. With this, I want to now invite my learned speaker, Professor Rizwan Qaisar Saab. Professor Rizwan Qaisar Saab needs no introduction in the academic circles, especially academic circles of Delhi and of the whole country.
Madam, I have also joined.
He is specialized in the medieval history and has remained on so many administrative posts in Jamia Millia Islamia, where he is working. He was the former head of the Department of History and Culture, Jamia Millia Islamia, and also he was the director of Center for Comparative Religions for a long time. We welcome you, sir. We present our warmest welcome to you. You please now start your lecture and interact with our audience. Thank you so much, Professor Rizwan Qaisar Saab.
A word of thanks and gratitude to all the people responsible for my being with you. First of all, Professor Hasina Hashia, who has been very kind to have contacted me quite a bit in advance, in view of the fact that even last year she wanted me to speak from this platform, but then by then I had made a commitment for Maulana Azad National University, where they have instituted a memorial lecture in the name of Maulana Azad, and because of which I could not attend. This year I was ready, and trust me, supply of electricity almost ditched me, but thankfully I'm saved because of some local manipulation of, like hotspot being created from one mobile to another, and I'm able to speak to you. My gratitude to Dr. Manzoor Sahib also, whom I have known for such a long time and have enjoyed a relationship of confidence with him on a large number of issues. Professor Zohur Muhammad Khan, who has been a very inspiring senior colleague in the university and such a gracious presence. And I'm also very happy and thankful to him for making it possible for me. And above all, Professor Qureshi, who has been a source of inspiration for me for a very, very long time since my JNU days. Even in casual conversation, there was always plenty to learn from him. His exposure to the larger world of diverse culture, as well as his academics and his administrative experience in JNU, and to all members of the audience who have joined this program. And in a way, as I was sharing with Professor Zohur Muhammad Khan Sahab, the virtual has become real for all of us. In our school days, perhaps a conference like this would have been a subject of science fiction that we are experiencing in our real life. And that's something worth appreciating, how human minds have broken barriers of continents, barriers of seas, and barriers of geography. And then technology has brought us together, irrespective of the fact that which part of the globe that we are sitting in. With the help of technology, we are communicating and in a way trying to create a world which would be universal, which would be acceptable, and which would be harmonizing. What better occasion to remember Maulana Azad on this day? Some years back, it was the Ministry of Education, then Ministry of Human Resource Development, decided to celebrate his birth anniversary as National Day of Education. And that is where we realize that historically, a person who had played tremendous role in India's struggle for independence. And historically, again, here is a person who played a seminal role in reconstruction of India. So in a way, kind of a double role that he performed as liberator and as someone who was charged with the responsibility of reconstruction, that we gather today to remember, pay our tribute, and also try to, identify markers which would act as guiding light, the beacon light for our walk into the future. It is in this context that is vitally important that we have gathered here to pay our homage. There are two ways of remembering Maulana Azad. One, that we gather and we pay our homage and be done with that. Another way of, remembering Maulana Azad could be that we gather here, we pay our homage, and we look back. We look back to the times that he lived in, look back the times that he generated ideas, look back the time he generated philosophy and participated in, the various dimensions of life to create landmark for all of us to take inspiration from and prepare ourselves for a journey into the future. Maulana Azad passed away on 22nd February 1858. And since then, we have plenty to look back to, the kind of speeches that he delivered in the Ministry of Education, Central Advisory Board of Education, large number of conferences that he inaugurated, and the treatises that he left, the ministerial notings that he, put it on ministry files, etc., etc. And I think quite appropriately for these reasons, Institute of Objective Health Studies identified a theme such as education as a way forward. How does education lead us to? How does education lead us to the future is an important question. But then for that, it is important to identify what are the landmarks that he left behind. A lot of people had questions about Maulana being in the position of a Minister of Education. A lot of it, because many of them also made this observation that he was no educationist to have guided the, Ministry of Education. And here I remember the words of the Chicago University professors, Rudolph and Rudolph. In some context, they made a very interesting observation that there is politics of education and there is politicization of education. And it is in the context of, and he very clearly defined what is politics of education and what is politicization of education. In the context of politics of education, he stated that politics of education involved a vision about reconstruction, a vision about evaluation of the society and its possible journey. A politics involved overall, wisdom to guide a society into its journey in the future. Politicization of education would largely, according to them, would mean making political capital out of existing institutions of learning. And it is in this context that we can make a distinction that Maulana Azad was someone who was indulging in politics of education and not in politicization of education. So that's my way of paying tribute to Maulana Azad, that why was he trusted with the charge of Ministry of Education at a time when he is not recognized as an educationist and yet he is trusted. But much more than anybody else, I think it was Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru who had a lot of faith in Maulana Azad and his capacity to guide. But seen in the perspective of 1947, because Maulana Azad joined Ministry of Education, it was then known as the Department of Education, in February 1947. Because when the interim government was formed, Maulana Azad was not particularly keen about joining that. He thought that somebody else should be in his place. It was Asif Ali who joined Ministry of Education. Then it was known as the Department of Education. But then, because of circumstances, he joined that ministry in February 1947. After India became independent, then the same Department of Education became Ministry of Education, and he remained its minister. He remained its minister throughout till the end of his life. And I just stated a while ago, on February 22nd, 1858. And he held the ministry under his belt till the end of his life. What is equally important for all of us to recognize that Maulana was presiding over two ministries. One is called the Ministry of Education, and there was another ministry under his belt called NRSR, Natural Resources and Scientific Research. That was also ministry under Maulana. If we were to see from today's perspective, then one would say Maulana had three ministries under his belt. Because Ministry of Culture, which is a separate ministry today, culture was also a subject under the purview of the Ministry of Education then. So natural resources, scientific research, Ministry of Education, culture being part of it, and he presided over its destiny. What were the concerns of Maulana Azad at the time that he became minister? There were many. Let me identify some of his concerns and then go on to lay emphasis on the kind of theme that is, adopted by IOS for today's program, education as a way forward. Maulana Azad identified three very direct, immediate areas where the ministry needed to lay a lot of focus. One, he repeatedly said that Indian education system needed to be, freed from the colonial baggage. And he was very conservative. In several of his speeches, he identified that education that was constructed prior to India becoming independent was done by the non-nationals in non-national interest. That means he repeatedly emphasized that the colonial rulers were not working in the best interest of India because they were non-nationals. So entire education system was run by non-nationals in non-national interest, number one. Number two, he said that we need to free education system from the colonial baggage. Three, we need to reconstruct education in a manner where, while politics is being democratized, knowledge should also be democratized. And democratization of knowledge would require expansion of education in large number of areas. Expansion of education in the field of schools, at the level of colleges, and also at the level of science and technology. These were the areas that Maulana Azad wanted to take the message and take the institutional support of the ministry in reconstruction of education. Another area that we should also pay attention to, that we mostly miss out, but we only, bring in those elements for enumeration. But I think more than enumeration, we should also get into the logic of their construction. And that, under the leadership of Maulana Azad, there was a national reconstruction of our culture with the establishment of institutions such as Sahitya Academy, Lalit Kala Academy, Sangeet Natak Academy, and above all, Indian Council for Cultural Relations. So we have education, we have culture, we have science, we have technology. All this is being done by a person who himself never went to an academic institution of any kind. Maulana is said to be an Islamic scholar. But by today's standard, can we imagine that Islamic scholar who never went, he went to a madrasa? Because he is someone who is educated at home. Arrangements were made by his father, Maulana Khairuddin, being part of elite society of Calcutta. It was not considered prudent for him to be sent to any institution of learning, however small, big, eminent, or ordinary. He is someone who is educated at home. He is someone who acquired vast amount of knowledge in just not the Islamic. He said that he trained himself in Islamic sciences. But then Maulana Azad was someone who exposed himself to the larger dimensions of intellectual world of Europe, intellectual world of the people associated with enlightenment. A philosopher such as Rousseau, who inspired him in his life. But then he was also someone who was exposed to the indigenous and the oriental sources of learning. So in a way, if you look at Maulana's personal exposure, Maulana's personal exposure was into dimensions which go beyond mere religious education. And yet, the person did not have a degree. Forget about a degree, not even a school certificate. And yet, precisely because of the kind of commitment that he had shown to the process of learning, if you look at the process of learning, then you realize that Maulana has, some exposure to it. Two examples would satisfy. When he started Al-Hilal in 1912, he had also started a madrasa kind of an institution in Calcutta. And his idea was that Muslims have not received the right education even in Islam. And with the help of this institution, if he could impart the right education to them. It was a non-starter. We'll have to face the fact that it was a non-starter. Another time that Maulana experimented quite successfully with certain institution of education, sorry, and that is Madrasa Islamia Ranchi, 1970. I wish I was better equipped technology-wise to show you photographs of Madrasa Islamia Ranchi that I studied. I went to many places and institutions associated with Jamia, associated with Maulana Azad before I published my book. Ranchi was one such place. Maulana was confined for 3 years or more. And it was here Maulana Azad established Madrasa Islamia Ranchi in 1970. And the chronogram that he had, had put on the gate of this madrasa called Futuhat-e-Ghaibi. Futuhat-e-Ghaibi implied that madad would come from the divine. And that also became a identity marker for the year 1970. So in a way, you realize that here is Maulana Azad, who is establishing an institution for Islamic learning of madrasa kind. But then I think vitally important for us to pay attention that Maulana Azad institution of Islamic learning like madrasa, by today's standard, would be one of the most modern. And as a matter of fact, if many people were to return to the larger agenda of modernizing madrasa, they should return to the kind of curriculum that he had prepared, the syllabi that he had structured, the kind of provision that he made. And one of them I would like to mention, in case I forget in the course of my presentation. He talked about education of muta'allimin. It's an interesting word. If we were to use this word muta'allimin, many of us would be ignorant about the word, because now Urdu words are increasingly becoming unfamiliar to even Urdu speaking people. And muta'allimin simply would mean the educators. And even educators should be educated in the field of madrasa education. And that's the kind of a serious intellectual engagement of Maulana Azad. In 1970, politically he had become active. But then through journalism, and even before he launched Al-Hilal, he was also active in the politics of Calcutta. He had not become an All India name before the launch of the paper. But in Calcutta, he was active. Therefore, the central point that I'm trying to argue, Maulana's engagement with Madrasa Jamia Ranchi is interesting. I think it should not surprise that someone like him brought in subjects like sciences, geography, mathematics, English, history, world history, as all part of, like syllabi of Madrasa Islamia Ranchi. Apart from the kind of curriculum that he prepared, that curriculum in a way matched the government kind, that after passing out from Madrasa Islamia, students could easily enter the college level of studies. And imagine the kind of subject that he introduced. And a point that I have never been tired of speaking ever since I came across this particular evidence within the boundary walls of Madrasa Islamia Ranchi, is that the people who helped Maulana Azad contributed tremendously in establishing Madrasa Islamia Ranchi. We have large number of Hindus participating. The kind of honor board that they have, and is another point that I have never been tired of mentioning, that the people did not have, people in the madrasa, those who were responsible for its administration, they did not have any sense of history. That honor board was plastered with posters. And I requested the management to help me remove these posters. And believe me, I used several buckets of water in order to wet these posters so that I could remove them. And believe me, whatever that I discovered was treasure for me. The names which read out on a marble plaque, names were of those who had made contribution for the establishment of this madrasa. The first name, topmost, and it read in Urdu and in English. He said, Rai Sahab Thakur Das, Rais-e Ranchi. Also, people say that Ratu Maharaj, those who are familiar with Jharkhand would know that Ratu Maharaj has been also known as Rai Sahab Thakur Das, Rais-e Ranchi. He made maximum possible contribution to this. There are many Hindu names. Imagine 100 years ago, Hindus were contributing in establishment of a madrasa. It started by someone who had already begun earning that identity for himself as a religious man, Maulana people had started making a reference to Maulana Azad as Maulana. And here you have Rai Sahab Thakur Das contributing. That was Maulana's exposure. Another unsuccessful exposure to an institution of education was when Maulana started another madrasa in the context of non-cooperation Khilafat movement. That was the time Mahatma Gandhi had given a call to Indian students to boycott these government-run institutions, including government-aided institutions. And Maulana Azad started it to attract madrasa education so that they would leave government-aided madrasa and they would join this. Many of them joined. Maulana made arrangements for their charkha. He inspired them to wear Gandhi. He invited Mahatma Gandhi to come and see the kind of efforts that were made by him in order to bring these madrasa boys to an alternate system of education. But beyond that, Maulana Azad had no exposure to education which would have earned him the ministerial place in the cabinet of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru to preside over the Ministry of Education. But many people think that it was a huge recognition of Maulana Azad. But in a way, in another sense, if I were to look at it and also make a critical point, but then as a student of history, I'm making this critical point that in 1947, and even after India's constitution came into effect on 26 January 1950, shortly we will be celebrating yet another Republic Day. That time, Ministry of Education is not in the union list of subjects. Ministry of Education is not even in the concurrent list of subjects. Ministry of Education was a matter of state subject. So in a way, it's a recognition of Maulana's capacity, but in a way, it's also not so big a recognition that he's presiding over a ministry which is not in the union list of subjects. So what was he presiding over? Constitutionally speaking, Maulana made an attempt sometime in 50s. If education could be brought in the concurrent list, a committee was constituted to look into the matter, and the committee recommended that perhaps it is not advisable to incorporate education in the concurrent list of subjects. It was done only sometime in 70s. So let us accept the fact that Maulana kept on presiding over a subject, presiding over a ministry which is not even in the union list or, for that matter, concurrent list. And yet, he is doing it. So that's something that we need to recognize. What are the areas that Maulana, in a way, paid that kind of an attention? And let me tell you, while he is still a minister only of the Department of Education, after becoming the minister, he started giving press statements. There were many occasions to deliver speeches, etc., etc. And then Maulana very clearly recognized that it was unfortunate that at the time of independence, the overall literacy rate was only 15%. 85% of India's population, men and women, they all were illiterate. And he said that once the country has accepted the democratic path of its development and progress, it was vitally important that citizenry was also fully informed. Only informed citizenry would be able to take informed decisions, because now we would be seeking guidance from the public for our governance system. But for that governance system to remain an effective tool, we need to educate our children. We need to educate our adults. We need to educate, the larger society, so that the knowledge is democratized. And ordinary people are empowered to participate in governance by sharing their worldview, ideas, suggestions, etc. They would do it only if they were exposed to education. There were three impediments that Maulana confronted. Now, one, resource crunch. massive research grants. You will be surprised that at that point in time, the Ministry of Education had the advantage of only 1% of the GDP to be spent on education, because priorities were different. Priorities was reconstruction of the national life in large many other areas, but Maulana Azad said that priority should be redesigned. It should be altered to make number 3, after food and shelter. That's Maulana Azad saying that after food and after shelter, education should be given the topmost priority. And for that, the government of India should allocate resources to Ministry of Education. But then resources were not available. So the first difficulty that Maulana confronted in the context of his work and the kind of issues that he wanted to carry forward was that. Number 2, there was serious dearth of intellectual resources. Serious dearth of intellectual resources. When you don't have money, when you don't have trained teachers who would impart, that kind of training to children in his schools. Then Maulana, he wanted to introduce a concept of compulsory education service, and he used the word conscription, which is used in large number of countries where compulsory military service every citizen is required to render. In view of the paucity of the trained manpower bole to aaj ke zamane mein women power also we can say. Man with capital M should also include women. We have serious lack of it. There are not many who would come forward. Maulana wanted that all those who are educated should be able to spare one day of the week, should be able to spare one day of the week and dedicate themselves to teach these children in schools. Later on, sometime in late 80s and 90s, there was a movement known as Each One Teach One. That is something that was visualized Maulana Azad in 1947, 48, 49. I said, let people come forward. So that's the school level. Another was, how do you expand the base of higher education? Higher education, number 1, qualitatively needed to be altered. And even in terms of the higher education's quantitative reach, so that large number of colleges could be established, large number of universities could be established in imparting knowledge to college-going students in different parts of India. So that was Maulana Azad's second important concern. How do you do it? Expand the base of higher education. Who will regulate it? As rightly pointed out in her inaugural introductory remarks by Professor Hasina Hashia, University Grants Commission is something which comes into existence in 1953. It was enacted only in 1956 is another issue. But much of work had already started. Give me a break. Miran, अरे साहब पानी की बोतल रखी भी जरा उठा लो तो वहां से मेरे वर्क स्टेशन पे. Give me a second. I'm sorry for this break. आपके लिए भी थोड़ा सा ब्रेक हो गया. लगातार सुनते रहने से सामा खराशी हो सकती है. Thank you. So that was the second thing, that how do you expand the higher education base? And finally, Maulana Azad major concern was, and that was the concern of Maulana Azad and the ministry and the whole government of India, that what do you do in the field of science and technology education? What are the things that we need to do in that particular field? And it is in this context we realized that Maulana Azad very quick to recognize these problems, and there were two commissions that were created. The first University Education Commission that was created under the chairmanship of Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. First University Education Commission, something that nobody talks about. When we talk about the kind of commission, then we, at the max, we go back only to Kothari Commission of 1960s, but rarely do we refer to Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan Commission. And that was a commission which was charged with the responsibility of expanding the base of higher education. Then there is a secondary education commission called Mudaliar Commission. And Mudaliar Commission and Radhakrishnan Commission, they made their recommendation for the expansion in the school system and expansion in the university education. And finally, there was this committee to recommend how do we get into the field of scientific and technical education. It was in this context that the idea was that technological manpower had been constantly dislocated in the context of India's partition. And now India being on the cusp of the kind of a takeoff in that very area, it needed human resources of the kind, that human resources could be produced only with an institution that it built on its own on the model of MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the model which provided base for establishment of Indian Institute of Technology. It was known by another name, but only in due course of time it was renamed as Indian Institute of Technology, IT. An idea was that IT would just not establish in Kharagpur. There would be 4 important IIT, including this, in different geographical area of India. So one in the west, one in the east, one in the north, one in the south. And that is how you see that the initial IITs like Delhi, Bombay, Kharagpur, and Madras. So this is the kind of position that Maulana had. With the help of these recommendations, and mind you, another interesting thing about Maulana Azad and in his ministry, that he did not depend so much on the civil servants. You'll be surprised. People who acted as secretary in the ministry were not the ordinary civil servants. They were educationists, eminent educationists of their time, who had earned a name for themselves. And 4 names I would particularly like to mention. Many of you might be aware, but all those who are not may take recognition of the fact that Maulana has had the advantage of benefiting from the ideas from 4 very, very eminent people of the time. K.G. Sayyidan, Humayun Kabir, Shanti Sorkar, and Professor Tara Chand. These are educationists of great eminence. Maulana had the benefit of, depending on their advice. He never depended, at least till such time, to the best of my knowledge, till such time he was minister, he did not have any civil servant as secretary, because he knew the bureaucracy had its own style of working. In the realm of knowledge, he did not want bureaucracy to interfere. He did not want bureaucracy to impede the progress of education, because country needed to move on a fast track as far as education was concerned. So therefore, we realize that these are the 3 important areas that Maulana marked for a very quick and rapid progress. If we look at the foundation of Indian Institute of Technology, go into details, and then you realize the kind of speech that he delivered at the time of inauguration on 18th of August 1951. That early was established in a campus known as Hijli campus. Hijli campus was a detention center during the British government. During the Second World War, Hijli became, like aeroplane hangar for large number of warplanes to be maintained. It was established because B.C. Ray, the first Chief Minister of Bengal, and Maulana Azad enjoyed close relation, and he was more than happy in extending that kind of support. He said there's one place which would be good for starting IIT. The building in which it is started, now it has become museum. And there is a new building that is mostly projected in internet and other such forums. But then the old building, which is now museum, that is where on the stairs of it, there is a copper plaque saying that IIT was inaugurated by Maulana Azad on this day. And the kind of speech that he delivered at the time of inauguration, he said, fine, we are modeling it on MIT. But then even these institutions needed to be oriented to the national requirement. And the national requirement is that we need to produce engineers and others who would guide India in the path of its industrialization. And then you realize the Constitution is directly linked with India's development project. And we all know, we recognize the kind of role that IITs have played in the national life of India that is visualized as early as 1951. There are a large number of other institutions which are, in a way, we can say that they were nationalized. One such institution that we need to talk about is CSIR, Council of Scientific and Industrial Research. Even though fact remains that the CSIR was already started back in 1944 in the context of the Second World War. Soon after independence, it was incorporated. Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, was incorporated because these were the institutions of eminence which could serve the national purpose only when they were incorporated and they were brought under government control, full autonomy, with full autonomy, so that they enjoyed government support, but not necessarily government control. At best, they would be guided. The Minister of Education became, Prime Minister always used to be chairman of CSIR, and deputy chairman of CSIR would be the minister. So government support without exercising control. So we see that these are the institutions which are established by Maulana Azad or established under the Ministry of Education over which Maulana Azad presided. What more? Why should we remember Maulana Azad on 11th of November? And we should remember Maulana Azad for establishing cultural institutions, which established cultural institutions which hitherto had remained outside the purview of any government. direction or control, because it did not serve their purpose. Say, for instance, if we were to read the inaugural speech delivered by Maulana Azad at the time of the founding of the Sahitya Academy, which was originally named as Bharat Bharati, but only later on in the course of the debate, discussion, argumentation, it was decided that it should be better known as the Academy of Letters. In other words, Sahitya Academy. And if we were to read, go through Maulana's speech, Maulana very clearly argued that India consists of diversity. However, it was never in the interest of the colonial government to bring India's literary diversity under one roof. Now that India has become important, it is vitally, now that India has become independent, it was vitally important to have brought all its diversity under one roof. So be that the Assamia literature, Urdu literature, or Punjabi, Kannada, and Tamil, Telugu, Urdu, Hindi, whatever that we have, Sanskrit, Persian, every such literature being brought under the purview of the Sahitya Academy. And then you realize that India's diversity is celebrated under one roof. Idea was to let everyone know that their distinctive interest, their distinctive identity in the field of literature and language would be respected and honored by the ministry under the patronage of this academy. Membership was not open to everybody. Even Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was offered the membership of Sahitya Academy, but not as Prime Minister. The ministry very clearly stated that he was being offered the membership by virtue of being a writer himself. So he was not taken in just because he said that if he was taken in, then tomorrow any Prime Minister would claim membership of Sahitya Academy. But then Pandit Nehru deserves to be a member on the strength of he being a literature himself. And then you realize the kind of role Sahitya Academy played then. Thankfully, Sahitya Academy continues to play that kind of role in the literary life of India even today. Imagine how many years have passed. The foundation of Sahitya Academy remains as strong as ever. But then so is true about Lalit Kala Academy. Given the fine art, culture of fine art that pervades and permeates in all parts of India. They all were brought under one roof, like Sahitya, like literature. And the purpose was India's diversity would be celebrated under one roof. So in the field of fine arts, Lalit Kala Academy, we have ministry working tirelessly to produce an institution with tremendous amount of autonomy. Its governance structure was ensured to remain. Its governance structure was ensured to work as an autonomous organization. And Sangeet Natak Academy, another very interesting speech that was delivered by Maulana Azad. Given the kind of a tradition that exists in India, in terms of Sangeet and in terms of Natak, what better way to bring up that under one roof? And then you realize that Maulana Azad brought these institutions under one roof. And above all, Indian Council for Cultural Relations. Maulana thought that the culture, art, music, these are instruments to bring India together. Because they are as diverse. And while celebrating India's diversity, he was trying to generate a sense of unity. There was a national reconstruction objective behind doing all this. And that is what he does. And above all, while he was doing it in the national context, it was vitally important for him to also do it in the national context, expose India's culture to the rest of the world, and also bring diverse culture that existed in other parts of the world closer to India. And for this very purpose, Maulana Azad took initiative and steps to establish Indian Council for Cultural Relations. Initially, it was meant to be only to give exposure of India's cultural diversity to West Asia, because there was an image that was created in the West Asian world by Pakistan that India was bereft of any Muslim after its partition. And the famous incident is an Indian ambassador to Egypt, who was a Muslim, was reported in Egyptian press that a Pakistani ambassador has arrived in India. When the matter was reported to Maulana Azad, he was a little shocked that the Arab world need to be exposed to the larger realities that existed in India, that India had a sizable chunk of its population as Muslims. And he thought that establishing Indian Council for Cultural Relations would definitely bring India closer to West Asia to begin with. Later on, many windows kept on opening in Indian Council of Cultural Relationship. One of the early windows happened to be Southeast Asia. So we have, like a platform which became a factor for interaction between cultures. Global cultures in specific pockets with Indian cultural diversity. And then ICCR to be a platform for that very kind of a cultural interaction on global scale. Today, ICCR would perhaps have as many windows as possible in Europe, in America, in East Asia, in Southeast Asia, in West Asia, and other parts. An idea is to let the world know that India consists of cultural diversity. And let the West Asian world know that India has a sizable chunk of its population as Muslims. That was the purpose, immediate purpose. Because when an institution is established, there is no one purpose. There are multiplicity of purposes that Maulana ensured. That was also, in a way, on the initiative of Maulana Azad. Now this ICCR is under the Ministry of External Affairs. These cultural institutions are under the control of Ministry of Culture. But then large number of institutions that are really talked about are under the Ministry of Human Resource Development. University Grant Commission, I do not want to go because it's a matter of public knowledge. Then we realize that these are the issues. These are the issues that we should recall, remember, and pay our tribute to Maulana Azad. Every single institution established under his guidance, under the Ministry of Education, we can recall with confidence that they have served the nation very well. They are still continuing to serve the nation. Every other day we hear a story about U.G.C being replaced. But thankfully his foundations have been laid so strong that people think of it are not able to replace it. Maybe someday somebody would, improve upon its working. But as an institution, it was so thought-filled institution at the time of its foundation. They were not established overnight. They were established over a period of years of debate, discussion, and involving vision of India's future. So given these, and given the kind of an expansion that India made in the field of secondary education, primary education, and university education, we all need to return to history again and again. The journey was undertaken at a time when resources were limited. And within these limited resources, India was expected to march ahead into the future under the guidance of Maulana Azad and his ministry. If we look at it, I think as a student of history, I have reasons to be, happy that I was able to discover these institutions in the files of the ministry in National Archives of India and other places. Indian Institute of Technology has very interesting sources in order to tell us that even when India did not have enough money, there was a provision that IIT Kharagpur could hire foreign faculty in certain fields of specialization that India may not have had enough at that point in time. So these are some of the things that I would like to recall while paying homage to Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. And while I pay my homage to Maulana Azad, I also thank Institute of Objective Studies and all the organizers for having thought it proper to pay that kind of homage while calling his services. So I once again thank, and I thank members of the audience, wherever they are located, for their patience. However, if there are questions, I shall be able to answer them. Thank you so much, Professor Qureshi sir, Professor Hasina Hashia Sahiba, Zohur Muhammad Qasim sahab, Professor Zohur Muhammad Khan sahab, and Manzoor sahab. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this enlightening and wonderful lecture. Sir, you proved with evidences that Maulana Abul Kalam Azad has greatly contributed in the field of education through his writings, through his journals, and through various institutions. So it is now our duty to move this movement forward. Thank you so much. Sir, there is a question because the battery of your phone is down. There is a question for you.
No, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
The question is, what steps he took, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad took for the education of women? Because when we see the data, available data of 2011, there is still a huge gap between the literacy rate of men and women. So what steps, what concrete steps he took for the education of women? Thank you.
There are many instances, Hasina Sahiba, where steps were initiated to expand the base of education among women. Is another matter that particular dimension has not been adequately highlighted with statistics, etc., etc. But as regards initiative from Maulana Azad and his ministry, there are evidence which says that Maulana was very concerned about it for two reasons. One, if women were educated, they would be educated as citizens. And when women would be educated, the next generation of Indians would further be educated. So in a way, there is double objective in making provisions for women's education. But let us not forget the fact there are issues about women's education. Mind you, either, like we create separate institutions for women, Given the kind of cultural level of development at that point in time, it was not easy for women to come out of their homes to go to academic institutions. It was not possible for them to have taken education in co-ed education. So that could also be perhaps a social factor for lack of exposure, their lack of exposure to to learning. But as regards ministry's initiative is concerned, he certainly took that initiative for this double purpose, to educate women as citizens and educate them so that the next generation would also receive that kind of education and training at the feet of their mothers.
So much. Thank you so much, sir. Now I invite Professor Z.M. Khan Sahab, Secretary General IAS. He is a great political scientist of the country and educationist also. Professor Z.M. Khan Sahab, we want to listen your impressions. Please, you start.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yeah, very much audible.
Yeah,
At least to me.
You know, in terms of remembering Maulana Azad, I suffer from a little nostalgia because it was 1957 when I had a chance to attend the first youth festival in Talkatora Garden, which was organized basically by Maulana Azad. And I met him because all teams were invited for a cup of tea at his residence. So all of us went there and I met him personally along with the then Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. So, and I have great regards for that man because he's a top rank Islamic scholar, a top rank modern mind, a top rank person who adjusted himself with the changing times in which he was placed. For me, the most important aspect to be learned from Maulana Azad's life is that he should be placed in the context of his times. And I think he was the person who saw the most difficult times of Indian history, where partition took place, where forced migration took place, creation of new nation, and all kinds of these problems were there. And in spite of all that, he was in the middle of everything. He was seeing everything from very, very close quarters. And he was not bewildered, he was not disturbed, and he had got his own style and his own philosophy to give to the people of India. I think that was the great quality of Maulana Azad. I congratulate Professor Rizwan Qaisar, who has covered such a vast area of his actions and activities and thought. And I think he deserves to be congratulated in right earnest fashion that he has worked so hard on Maulana Azad. But let me tell you that Maulana Azad, if we look at his lifestyle and see in what difficult situations he was placed, the national struggle was going on, liberation struggle was going on. Congress was a conglomeration of all kinds of philosophies. Even those people who were communalists, they were also there under the banner of Congress. And he was handling all of them. He was handling when he was in a very, very important position, while he was the president of Congress also, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, he is the person who should be looked by Indian Muslims particularly in a way that how Indian Muslims should really be reacting and behaving in difficult times in which they are placed. Because the difficult times for Indian Muslims still continue, and they have to fight back on many, many fronts. So his lifestyle, his thought, his action pattern, and everything becomes very important. I think these behavioral patterns of Maulana Azad should be studied more closely so that he becomes relevant for a common man to deal with the situations in which he is placed. I don't want to make a speech on it. What I want to say that he was a perfect Islamicist, a perfect modern man, and a perfect mind who accepted challenge and change both simultaneously. Thank you very much.
Valuable impressions and personal experiences. Thank you so much. Now I invite Chairman, Institute of Objective Studies, Dr. Manzoor Alam Saab. He is a great visionary and he is the person behind all these activities. He is concerned he is very much concerned for imparting education to the masses, both men and women. Now I invite him, Dr. Muhammad Manzoor Alam, we are waiting for your impressions. Thank you so much. Alam Saab. I think he is not available. So now I respectfully request Professor M.H. Qureshi Saab, who is presiding over this function. I want to mention their audience that Professor M.H. Qureshi is my mentor. He has did PhD from Jodhpur University. He was working in CSRD JNU as a professor and he has remained on various positions there like DSW and Dean of Faculty. He has also worked in Addis Ababa University and other universities of Ethiopia and Germany. Besides, he worked as chair professor in Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi, against A.M. Khaja chair. Professor M.H. Qureshi specialized in environment, agricultural geography, and rural development. Besides being interested in cultural studies and comparative religions, Professor M.H. Qureshi has served at numerous administrative positions, including member ICSSR from 1st November 2011 to 2014, and as a Vice President Sadbhav Mission, New Delhi. He developed and taught many courses at MA and MPhil level. He has many papers published in reputed and international reputed journals of national and international repute. He has published over 10 books. Besides, he has guided around 20 PhD students and 40 MPhil students. With these words, sir, I respectfully invite you to give your presidential remarks. Thank you, sir.
Madam, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. सबसे पहले तो मैं सलाम अर्ज करता हूँ मंजूर आलम साहब है नहीं, लेकिन ज़हूर मोहम्मद साहब को बहुत दिनों के बाद मैं देख रहा हूँ। अस्सलाम वालेकुम ज़हूर भाई।
वालेकुम अस्सलाम व रहमतुल्लाह।
और मेरा सलाम रिजवान को भाई को भी
अलग से ना भेजे सर, मैं उधर ही से ले लूंगा।
नहीं भाई, अलग से देना जरूरी है।
नहीं सर, नहीं।
देखिए, सबसे पहले तो मुझे कंफ्यूजन था जुबान का कि किस जुबान में ये बातचीत होगी, लेकिन अच्छा हुआ कि हसीना हाशिया ने शुरू ही किया इंग्लिश में. So friends, we are celebrating the birth anniversary of Maulana Azad. For about a number of years, we had already forgotten. This nation had forgotten about him. It was only 2008 that 11th November was declared as the Education Day, which coincides with the birth anniversary of Maulana Azad. In spite of the fact that he was awarded Bharat Ratna in 1992, but somehow or the other, nothing was talked about, and it was only the scholarly discussions where Maulana was mentioned. He was not only a visionary, an educationist, but he was actually an amalgam of tradition and modernism. He was educated as Professor Rizwan Qaisar has painted a very vast canvas, which can not be summarized in 10-15 minutes. But however, he is so vivid that summarization is not essential, because education, for the first time, he was handling. Actually, Rizwan Saab, correct me, he took over this department from C. Rajgopalacharya. Earlier, C. Rajgopalacharya was handling education, but Maulana took over from him. He was right to say that he took over education at a very difficult time, and he took over a state subject. It was not a central subject at that time. But Maulana Azad's personality, one can gauge from the fact that he was one of the tallest members of the independence movement, along with Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, and Maulana Azad. So he was one of the tallest members of this leadership, which was agitating for and taking the movement ahead for the independence of India. Maulana Azad, one can see from his educational background, as Professor Rizwan Qaisar has already told you, that he was educated informally at home, and he had never attended any formal education. But the vision which he had for educational development, all aspects of education, whether it was humanities or science, technology, everything, he had this vision that how to go about. And that is how he was able to create. If we look at the university situations in the colonial period, they were first established in the port towns. In January, Calcutta University; in March, Bombay University; and 5th September 1858, rather 1857. The three universities were established in 1857. January, Calcutta; March, Bombay; and September, Madras University. Allahabad University, which was put in the Hindi heartland, was established in 1887. So this higher education system at that time was geared for a particular purpose, this Macaulay's methodology. But great responsibility was there on the shoulders of Maulana Azad when we had to reconstruct the education after independence. It was not only primary education, the secondary education, higher education, but at the same time, Kharagpur actually has been described by IIT Kharagpur was established with his great interest. And these IITs were responsible for the best technical education in the country. Likewise, medical education. The women education. He had emphasized the girls' education also. And the three commissions which were established during his time were not only Radhakrishnan Commission, but Mudaliar Commission and also Zakir Hussain Commission, which had the responsibility of working out the Bunyadi Talim, the basic education. So he had a vision to not only vision, but at the same time, he was one of the advocates of Hindu-Muslim unity. If you look at his speech in 1923, a special session of Congress Party, he was delivering the presidential address, and he said that if the angels had to come and descend on this earth, and from the top of the Qutub Minar, declare that if you leave this issue of Hindu-Muslim unity, Swaraj will be given within 24 hours. I will refuse to take that Swaraj, because this Swaraj, if I take, will only benefit India. But if I take this Hindu-Muslim unity question and abandon it, is going to damage the humanity. And therefore, I will not take Swaraj in the in exchange of the Hindu-Muslim unity. So he was a great propagator of our Hindu-Muslim unity, because he also was very much aware of our cultural diversity. India is highly culturally diverse, not only geographically diverse, but culturally diverse. From north to south and east to west, we have a amalgam of and collage of cultures, and these cultures had to be amalgamated, integrated, and that is why he had created so many cultural institutions, which Professor Qaisar has already enumerated. He actually brought educationists. Actually, the first U.G.C chairman was Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar. C.D. Deshmukh came later. And it is known that some of the professors protested that why bureaucrat, ICS person is being brought to head the institution which is related to universities. And the answer, I do not know where I read it, was given that the professors are unable to give money. They are extremely miser, and they cannot sign the checks of crores. But this man has been the governor of Reserve Bank, and he will lavishly give the funds to the university, because it's not the education. The professors are supposed to give the education, but the finances has to come from the U.G.C. Somehow or other, he himself was culturally very attuned to. If you look at his writings, somewhere he has mentioned about Masita Khan, the sitar player, and sometimes he has given some lesson to Maulana in sitar also. So he had multifaceted personality, and while one can say that he was representing tradition and modernism both together, and he became amalgam and a sort of ambassador for this type of combination, that where modernism and the tradition may be wedded together, and there is no problem in having the modern outlook in a traditional garb, because he was not only educated, he was intellectually inclined, and that is why he was able to think so broadly. He was also, we know that he started with the journalism, and this journalism had given him the chance to become politically active also. So he was not only intellectual, an activist, a visionary educationist. And now we have to think of the way forward of education, where we are going to go with this new educational policy. The new educational policy has come, and the intellectual community, the community which is looking after the education, they should now be thinking of the directions in which the education has to be taken. And it is the responsibility on the universities, on the school education, on the primary education. Everywhere this direction has to be decided so that one can see that the educational development takes place and it is inclusive development, not exclusive development. So we have to think over it. And with these words, I thank IUS, I thank Manzoor Sahab, I thank Zahur Bhai, and I also thank Rizwan Qaisar for giving a very, very elaborate presentation about Maulana Azad. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your valuable and insightful remarks. We were greatly benefited as usual. We came to know many unfolded facts about the life and contribution of the great educationist Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. Now, sir, this is the time for presenting vote of thanks. I present my heartfelt thanks to Professor Rizwan Sahab, the learned speaker of this day, who gave us who delivered a very wonderful lecture and unfolded some new facts and the information regarding the life and contribution of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. And I am personally I present my vote of thanks on behalf of Chairman Institute of Objective Studies and other dignitaries of Institute of Objective Studies to you, sir, because you both accepted our invitation and spared your precious time to make this event a successful event, because we all know that nation is today celebrating this as the National Education Day, and everybody is busy in their own celebrations. I am thankful to my Secretary General Sahab, Professor Zadeb Khan Sahab, who has spared his time and given us his valuable impressions. I am thankful to the participants, both online as well as online, and also the staff of IAS for taking part and contributing in this event. Thank you so much. Thank you for all. Stay blessed and stay safe. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So I hope it is over now.
Yes.